Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. On behalf of the European Hub and the Global Alliance for the Right of Nature, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you for this important webinar on the right of nature in Ireland. We are truly honored to have such distinguished panelists with us this evening: Peter Doran, Gerry, Darby, and Cormac Cullinan. Each of them bring a wealth and knowledge and experience to the conservation and are excited to hear their insight. The issue of this right of nature has been introduced in Ireland by Irish Citizen Assembly on Biodiversity laws and is being formalized by the proposal on a constitutional amendment, which will be presented us by Peter Doran, doctor from the Queen Belfast University. Following Peter, Gerry Darby, manager of the Lough partnership, sorry for the pronunciation of the lake, will be share his work and integrating the right of nature into the local environmental initiative, shedding light on a community-based approach. Lastly, Cormac Cullinan, author of the reference work Law on the Right of Nature and director of the Laugh Institute, founder member of GARN, will give us his impression of this new development. Finally, we launch a question and answer session and rather a discussion. This webinar is a part of a series initiated by the European Hub to explore in depth the philosophy of the right of nature and how it's being adapted across Europe. It is an exciting opportunity to engage in a mindful dialogue about the future of your planet, Mother Earth, and the legal recognition of the rights of ecosystems. We are grateful to our panelists for sharing their time and their expertise, and we thank all of you for being part of this inaugural session. Without further delay, I will now hand over to our first speaker, Peter Doran. Please, Peter, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Leah. Thank you for the invitation. I've sent some slides to Leah, but they're not absolutely essential. I'm going to just use 10 minutes to summarize a journey that many of us on the island of Ireland have been on for the past probably 4 or 5 years in terms of the rise of the agenda around the rights of nature and the discussion about the possibility of firstly incorporating those rights into the Constitution of the Republic of Ireland, and most recently a discussion mostly in the north of Ireland, but one that touches on the entire island. That is the discussion around the plight of Lough Neagh. It's the biggest lough of its kind across the islands of Ireland and Britain. And it's experiencing a near-death experience because of multiple sources of pollution. It's in dire straits, as we'd say. And as part of the response, there has been a remarkable upsurge in support from community campaigns, from long-standing campaigners, from academics and others, to consider that the lough might become the first major body of water on the island to be recognized as a rights-bearing entity. But let me first of all take you back to the early conversations, stretching back about 4 or 5 years now. And some of the earliest conversations focused on the motions that were passed unanimously. First of all, in Derry and Derry City and Strabane District Council, a young councillor acted really as the voice of a local movement, a local campaign, tabled the idea, the motion that the rights of nature should be recognised by the City and District Council. And within weeks, another local council, Donegal County Council, on the other side of the border, you'll know that there are two jurisdictions. There's Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland, and Derry and Strabane are on the Northern Ireland side, in the British jurisdiction. Just on the other side of the border, on an evening at Donegal County Council, a very similar motion calling for the council's recognition of the rights of nature was passed. And these motions were circulated across the island and went viral in a sense. A number of councils across the island have now recognised and launched, albeit with mixed results. They have launched a series of public consultations to gauge public responses and to inquire as to how these rights might be given life, given form in the work of the local bodies. The only practical outcome from the Derry and Strabane motion has been a consultation which proceeded over a number of months. And recently, as part of a stakeholder group convened by the council, it's a climate and sustainability stakeholder group, a seat was allocated to the Foyle River system. So Dr. Liam Campbell, good friend and colleague, represents the main estuary, the Foyle estuary, which goes between Derry and Donegal. And the estuary now has a seat among the stakeholders making decisions about the future of climate change and sustainability. It's a symbolic outcome, but nevertheless significant and not to be dismissed. Now, on the back of the emerging campaign, we had local councils, we had local partnerships linked to local councils. They're called PPNs. People began to think about the rights of nature in the context of a larger campaign, a larger possibility, and that possibility emerged when the Citizens' Assembly on biodiversity loss was convened as part of a government commitment in the last government mandate in the Republic of Ireland. This was back in, well, the Assembly was convened around 2022. These citizens' assemblies are earning the Republic of Ireland a global reputation for innovative, democratic, deliberative approaches to issues that are often difficult for politicians, for political politicians, or issues that they want to hand over in some way for a public debate because they're often risk averse. They don't want to step out in front of popular opinion. So, for example, these citizens' assemblies, which report directly to the Irish Parliament and are the subject of deliberation by parliamentary committees and have a mandate from the government, not necessarily to have their recommendations implemented, but at least considered. These citizens' assemblies have given rise to significant developments, not least was the incorporation into the Irish Constitution the right to equal marriage and also an amendment to the Irish Constitution on reproductive rights. So very substantive, modernising innovations have occurred in the Irish Republic as a result of the recommendations of the citizens' assemblies. These assemblies are funded by the government, but are run independently, much as you'd run an election, independently with scrutiny. 99 random citizens from across the Republic of Ireland are selected. over the course of a few months, very able experts in the subject, in this case the crisis of biodiversity, present to the 99 citizens under the chair, under an independent chair, and they reach a number of recommendations. Over 100 recommendations were published in the report of the Citizens Assembly. And these included the recommendation that Ireland incorporate, well, I should say that Ireland hold a referendum on the incorporation of the rights of nature into the Irish Constitution. That's how we consider amendments to the Constitution. We put them to the people in a plebiscite or a referendum. Immediately after these recommendations were published, they were successfully steered through a parliamentary committee, and they survived more or less intact in the joint parliamentary committee. It was a committee made up of representatives of both the Dáil and the Senate. The recommendations also included the formation of an expert group to be set up by the Irish government to consider how the government might respond to the Citizens' Assembly's recommendation. Now, all of that is great. It has given the rights of nature a real boost. It has brought the debate to national prominence, I should say, prominence across the island. People have been very excited. But apart from an action point in the government's biodiversity plan, which calls for the formation of the expert group, no significant progress has been made towards convening a referendum or holding a referendum to test public opinion. Now, that's a big story, or it's another story. There has been, in the last referendum called by the government was accused of mismanaging the process. And they've used really the loss of momentum behind the idea of the Citizens' Assembly. They've used the rather bad experience from the government's perspective of the last referendum. They've used that to park the idea and to distance themselves from following up on the recommendation from the Citizens' Assembly and from their own parliamentary committee. We've also had an election since all of that took place, and none of the parties included a recommendation to follow up on the Citizens' Assembly in their manifestos going into the election. So we have to work and continue to ask the government to honour those recommendations. In the meantime, the plight of Lough Neagh, which for the most part is based up in the middle of Northern Ireland. Its catchment is cross-border. It goes across the border. The plight of Lough Neagh has led to a series of calls for comprehensive action by the government to protect it from multiple sources of pollution. And in the case of Lough Neagh, it's an unusual case. There's also a call for the transfer of ownership of the lough from the Earl of Shaftesbury, who has the rights to the base or the bottom of the lough, and some rights associated with his property rights over shooting, for example. The ownership issue is very, very contentious. The source of his ownership is disputed, and the debate about that role that he has and his family has had since the plantation has been hotly disputed really for many years. So there's an interesting possibility that the transfer of ownership, that the return, the restoration of ownership of the lough as part of a comprehensive response to restoring the health of the lough could open up a possibility for not only improving the environmental protection and governance arrangements, restoring community control over those arrangements, restoring community accountability, or the accountability of communities and the accountability of stakeholders. We could be looking at the possibility of transforming our very idea of ownership once the communities organise and agree a form of guardianship which would include the rights of the lough, something like an agreed charter and a government recognition of the charter, that the lough in itself has is a rights-bearing entity, and that this is part of the future. What's interesting is that the Earl of Shaftesbury has agreed that we should look at the rights of the lough as part of any new dispensation. So that's where we're at. In many ways, the rights of nature debate is likely now to accelerate and to, I think, possibly take on a more concrete and understandable phase, because the rights of nature can be rather abstract, but the rights of Lough Neagh as a feature, a major feature of our landscape on the island, a feature that has been present to us through all of our generations, through ancient stories, through ancient associations with the language, but also many associations with the political disputes that have formed identities and formed our political considerations across the island, not least the histories of colonialism, the histories of plantation. A transformation of that story, in some ways, an incorporation of the regard for the lough as a rights-bearing entity, could now be considered maybe as the latest phase of our peace process, reconciling ourselves to those violent histories of expropriation and appropriation. And that's part of the backdrop now to the debate about the lough, is the question of democracy, the question of how these issues of ecology and ownership and guardianship can now become part and parcel of our peace process, making peace with ourselves, making peace with those who have been involved in benefiting from histories of appropriation and expropriation, and restoring sovereignty, not only to people, but to the loughs, the lands, the woods, and the places that we love and cherish. So that's the story in a nutshell, and I'd be happy to take questions after Cormac has a few comments. Thanks.
Shall I start now?
Yes, just thank you so much first, Peter. And maybe Cormac, if you want to react first, while I will promote everyone to be a panelist for the debate part, I think it will be better because everyone wants to see each other. So
Should I give some observations now?
yes.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Peter, and just to everybody who's joined, what a pleasure it is for me to be able to speak to an audience in Ireland about the possibility of rights of nature becoming part of the Constitution, and also, of course, in relation to the Lough. So, as my name probably indicates, my grandfather was came from Ireland, from County Limerick, and I still have family that farm the farm that he was born on in Ireland, and so I have a very soft spot for Ireland, and I am what's known as a plastic paddy. I have an Irish passport, even though, as you can hear from my accent, I'm South African in upbringing. But one of the things, before I comment further, which I've mentioned to Peter before, which I've found really quite interesting and strange for a number of years, is that there are enormous number of people involved in the rights of nature movement globally are from the part of the Irish diaspora, I suppose you could call it. Thomas Berry himself, who the Catholic monk who influenced me very much and who called for a new jurisprudence at Irish Heritage. A number of our colleagues in the United States, Linda Sheehan, Shannon Biggs, many of it, as you can tell by the names. But interestingly, even the coordinator, Natalia Green, who is based in Ecuador, also has Irish roots. So it's really surprised me over the years that the Irish are far more represented than one would expect in the global movement. And it's made me wonder if somehow the Celtic worldview is genetically communicable in some way. But nevertheless, I mean, one of the things that I do find very interesting, and Peter has touched on it, is in a way related to this question of colonization and going back to deeper roots. So for me, I first became an environmental lawyer, and then began to find that there were problems that I couldn't solve with drafting better laws, or they were deeper in the sort of philosophical approach to law. And then meeting Thomas Berry, in a sense, gave me the end of the string, and I began to see how one could move forward. But perhaps the simplest issue is that, you know, we humans are born into an existing system of order. The natural world is ordered, and then we create laws, etc., to order our societies. But for the vast majority of human existence, human societies were very conscious of the fact that we are one life form among many, and that if we wanted to prosper within this community of life, the most important thing was to find means of living, coexisting harmoniously with other beings, and always being conscious of, first of all, being grateful to be part of the Mother Earth, or whatever term was used, and secondly, conscious of the obligations that come with being particularly gifted members of that community of life, that we have duties to contribute to maintaining that community of life, to keeping it whole, as it were. And it seemed to me, once I saw this, that it was self-evident that our legal systems needed to reflect the reality, be informed, if you like, by the wider system of order, and reflect the reality that we are a subset. So, for example, as we know, there are very definite rules of nature. You could call them the laws of physics, or the laws of chemistry, etc. But, you know, for example, if you put more than a certain amount of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, it destabilizes the atmosphere, and you get climate change. Now, that's not something which is subject to negotiation. That is an existing system of order that we're born into. And so, in many ways, it seems to me that the current era, perhaps the last quite a few centuries, is an aberration, in the sense that for most of human existence, we've been quite clear that we need to fit in with the system of order, and celebrate our participation, and act with great respect to the other beings. And the more recent period that we're familiar with, of course, most cultures are dominated by the idea that humans are separate from and superior to nature, and that the law defines everything that's not a human being or a corporation as an object or resources, an asset available for extraction, use by humans. And so that hardwires in a relationship between the humans on the one hand and the rest of nature, one of use and exploitation, in the same way as if you've got a slave owner with rights, and a slave whose property, an entity, an asset, and you can see that that's designed to enable and facilitate the exploitation of the slave by the slave owner. And so that's the situation that we face in our legal systems now. But the interesting thing is that, of course, we know that, as a matter of fact, that the rest of the world is not object, that we live in an animate world full of all kinds of forms of life, but who are also linked together and through intricate relationships. And so the community of life is created by the relationships, and in a way that it is those relationships between the members which are particularly important. That's what creates ecological communities. It creates systems, if you like. And precisely because our legal system do not recognize nature as subjects, we don't focus on the relationships. We don't focus on the fact that life flows through these connections and these relationships. We see life, we see the world as a kind of construction, an assembly of objects, instead of, as Thomas Berry said, a communion of subjects. So, and in many ways, this attitude of separateness and superiority was something which colonial regimes brought with them when they came to countries, including Ireland, and displaced the local people and their systems of governance, and also with the religions, etc., which tended to venerate nature, or certainly there were many rituals, as you will know, to acknowledge our dependence on the harvest, on the seasons, etc. So now, as we in a, I was going to say post-colonial phase, but perhaps that's debatable. Part of the process of liberation, if I can put it that way, I think is acknowledging that we are perhaps embracing our membership of what is the most extraordinary community of life we've been able to discover anywhere in the universe. And for me, my entry into this work was very much colored by my own experiences. I was born, obviously a white male, but in the apartheid regime in South Africa. So I was born into the class of the oppressor. And it was only through a process of sort of unlearning a lot of what my culture taught me and going to university that I realized, well, you know, the implications of that, and joined the anti-apartheid struggle, and which was really a struggle against apartheid. Is Afrikaans, it means separateness, and that for me was very analogous. That regime was very analogous to what we humans have done in relation to other species. We, just as the apartheid regime said that a small group within the society was separate from and superior to society as a whole and entitled to exploit it for their own benefit. So by and large, the cultures that dominate the world today have regarded humans in that role, and we exploit everything else. So you could almost call it a kind of eco-apartheid. So I think that for me, rights of nature is perhaps one way in which we can begin the process of reintegrating our governance systems and ourselves into the community of life. Of course, physically, we always remain part of the community of life. It's just that we under the delusion that we're not. And you know, sometimes Indigenous people will say to me, well, we don't talk about rights, we just talk about our responsibilities to nature and Mother Earth. And of course, that's fine in an Indigenous culture where the culture already recognizes other beings. That it is correct, you know, the crucial thing is humans' duties and what we go into, how we behave. But one of the advantages of using rights of nature in Western dominate societies is that it jars people. They say, well, how can a tree or a lough or a mountain have rights, because objects can't have rights? And that then raises the question, but are they really objects? Are they, do they not have no agency? Are they just piles of stone or water? And in other words, and as soon as one accepts that they are beings, subjects, then one's into the language of relationship and relatedness. And at that point, the crucial issue is then, how should humans act in order to maintain good relations, in order to coexist harmoniously within nature, not with nature, but with our coexistence is with the other beings, but within the whole that is nature. And indeed, if you look at the Constitution of Ecuador, which incorporates rights of nature, it makes it very clear that rights of nature is seen as a means to achieve a form of living in which people live harmoniously within nature, with nature. They're drawing on an indigenous concept of summa causa and el buen vivir, which broadly speaking translate into the right way of living, or good way of living. So coming back to Ireland, I think it's very exciting, the initiative that you're involved in, partially because of the very deep Celtic roots, which had that indigenous perspective that I'm speaking of, and certainly, understood people to be very much enmeshed and participants in the wider community of life. And it seems to me that this move is in a way part of a kind of, or could be seen as part of a kind of decolonizing process of going back to a kind of indigenous understanding, which is not just romantic, it's also more accurate. I mean, it's just untrue to say that the world is made of objects, and that they exist for the benefit of human beings. It's just, I think, untrue that, ecology has long ago abandoned those kind of understandings. But I also think that it represents a huge opportunity for building unity among people. I was interested to hear about the Lough being the border between the Republic and Northern Ireland, because as a shared entity, it has the potential for unification. So we're in Cape Town, we're about to launch a campaign to have the Table Mountain Range recognized as a legal person. And last weekend, a group of us went up and spent the night on the mountain and performed ceremonies with indigenous leaders, etc., who from cultures for which it's very normal to commune with nature, because we felt that we before beginning that project, we needed to consult with the mountain itself as a being. And certainly in Cape Town, everybody loves the mountain. Everybody speaks of the mountain as if it's already a person in life. People will say, "Isn't the mountain looking beautiful this morning?" And so it already has a presence in people's lives, and it's something which cuts across race, class, gender, religion, and all of that is irrelevant in terms of relating to the mountain. And so one of the things we went up the mountain to in a way, we thought we needed the permission of the mountain to begin this process. But one of the messages, if you like, from the mountain was, the mountain is just the mountain. It'll carry on being the mountain, and its gift to us is that we can unite around the mountain. But we don't. But the real issue is how people relate to the mountain and our attitudes to the mountain, and we don't need the mountain's permission to work on people. So that was slightly unexpected, but I think probably quite accurate. So I think that your Lough could play a very similar role, and I think these initiatives are very exciting because we are trying to change hundreds of years of history by returning, in a sense, to very ancient perspectives, but perspectives which are also equally much more in line with contemporary science than the idea of the Earth as object. And yes, and certainly it will need a movement of people behind it to drive it, as most social change does require. But I personally find it enormously exciting to be part of it, because if you adopt this view, the world is a much more interesting place. It's a world of many beings and magic and history and myth, as well as science and law. And so I'd be very happy to support in any way I can your initiative, and I know many people within the wider Global Alliance Rights of Nature feel the same. So let me just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Cormac. Thank you all the people, generous like panelists, and it's good to see you, Eduardo, Morgana. Maybe it could be good if you join like panelists, if you could open your camera, it could be better, I think. And if I miss to ask you to become a panelist, but just send me a message, I could do it. But you are a lot, so maybe I miss someone. So, Peter, do you want to maybe react first, and after we have some question already?
Yes, I remember the conversation with Cormac when we talked about the prominence of people from Ireland in the movement. And I think it reminds me that I've always been convinced that an international movement behind these very localized campaigns can bring a real quality to the conversation. The the love of the Lough, the sense of belonging, the sense of wanting to transform our relationships with the Lough and our relationships with ourselves. I think these are deep shifts in how we understand ourselves as human and entangled in the more than human. But one of the things about the rights of nature movement is that it is intimate, it is place-based, but it is also tapping into cosmologies that are characterized or characteristics of spiritualities and cultures and ways of being across the world. And the more that we can bring these dialogues or these insights into conversation, the more that we reinforce that sense that we're on a common journey, but in a very plural way, through enacting diversity, enacting very diverse stories and sources of inspiration in terms of our ecosystems. We're nevertheless bringing great strength to one another. And when the Citizens' Assembly gathered in Dublin, one of the contributions that we arranged was a very powerful film by an indigenous leader in Ecuador who didn't suggest that the people of Ireland look to Ecuador, but that we look to our own histories, our own stories, our own ways of belonging, ways of being in the world that break out of that Euro modern myth that the world is an object. And the other point, just quote that comes to mind in all of this when we talk about the European colonial influence on our imaginaries, there's a quote by, I think it's Césaire, who says that colonialism is a form of thingification. It's colonialism that is responsible for translating, tempting us to translate the world into a series of things and calculations. So we're breaking out of that, and Ireland is a place in between, politically, culturally, colonially. We're in a place in between the European experience, but we share that colonial history. And I think for that reason, people on the island have a particular sensibility. And it's not a surprise to me that many of them show up in the rights of nature movement. Thanks, Leo.